WBSE. Happy Whiskey Wednesday. We're very excited to be here with you tonight. For those of you who don't already know me, I'm Julia Menn, the assistant editor and single malt feature writer for Whisket Network. And with me is staff writer and whiskey reviewer Robert Diana. And tonight we have a very special guest. Simon Brooking is the senior ambassador of Scotch Heritage for Beam Suntory and represents brands such as Laphroaig, Auchentoshan, Ardmore, Glengiri, and Bowmore. He's an expert in Scotch whiskey, holds the distinction of being keeper of the Quake, has been voted Scotch Whiskey Ambassador of the Year multiple years in a row, and he has led thousands of tastings around the globe. So we're so excited to have him here to talk about his history, learn about his experience, and take us through this fantastic lineup of single malts that we're going to be tasting together tonight. So welcome, Simon.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you, Rob. And it's westering home with a song in the air, light in the eye, and a goodbye to care. Laughter and love and a welcoming there. Isle of my heart, my own one. Where are the folks like the folks of the West? Donald and Bessie at Laphroaig are the best. There I will hie me and there I will rest. At home with my own folk on Isla. This music, it makes me sing this whiskey. And I just westered back home to the US from Scotland. Just got back from being in Scotland last Sunday. So
that's
visiting
brilliant.
a couple of our distilleries. So great to be back and looking forward to this evening.
Oh, yes. We have a great, very exciting lineup spanning quite a different number of different styles of whiskey. We will be tasting the Auchentoshan Three Wood, Glengiri Founders Reserve, Ardmore Legacy, Bowmore 12, Laphroaig 10, and Laphroaig Quarter Cask. So we got peated, we got unpeated, we got some Isla. It's gonna be big. If you folks have any of these whiskeys, we recommend you pour open a dram. It's Whiskey Wednesday. It's the middle of the week. Pour yourself a dram, kick back, relax. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the live Facebook chat and Soonish will let us know. And hopefully we'll be able to get Simon to answer any questions you may have. Or if you just want to give a comment, we would love those too. So before we really dive into all of these fantastic samples, Simon, take us through your background. You are a well-accoladed gent. What got you interested in whiskey in the first place? Just tell us about your journey.
Well, my love of Scotland really got me interested. It took me back to my homeland. My family emigrated. My dad was an engineering student at the University of Glasgow, and then the family, we moved from Scotland to North America when I was a young lad, and I eventually settled in the New York City area. I was involved in theater and performance, and I got an opportunity to become the Dewar's rep 25 years ago. And that included traveling back to Scotland and working with one of the master blenders from Dewar's at the time. So it really, it was a dive into the deep end of the pool to learn all about single malt scotches and the blends. And from there, I went to work for the Diageo group for 6 years. And that was the early years of the ambassador, some of the first ambassador programs that were being presented and utilized for marketing. The classic malt series, for those of you that know the early years of the Diageo portfolio promotions. And from that, I then moved from all the huge portfolio of Diageo to one distillery, the Dalmore, and that was with the Jim Beam brands at the time. So I went from this massive grouping to one distillery with an amazing distillery manager, Drew Sinclair, and his right-hand man in marketing, Mr. Richard Patterson, who many of you probably know of or have witnessed to his amazing presentations. He really is a showman, so I stole from the best. And then from there, when Beam then took on the Allied Domecq brands that included Laphroaig and Ardmore and Teachers Highland Cream Blended Scotch. And then 2014, Suntory purchased Jim Beam, and that was when I took on Bowmore, Auchentoshan, and Glengiri. So we've got 5 amazing distilleries that I represent today. And really, it's an honor and a privilege to work with the people who produce these amazing spirits in each region of Scotland. So, here we are today.
Wow, that's quite the history. Very cool. So how long were you with Dewar's before Diageo?
It was about a year. It was yeah.
And so then you spent 6 years at Diageo, and then you went to Beam, and then Beam Suntory?
Yes, correct.
Oh, nice. And I don't know if Rob wanted to talk about this later, but I know we'd been discussing, you are a keeper of the Quake, are you not?
I am, yes. And the keeper of the Quake is an honor bestowed to people who support the whiskey industry. And there are global honorees. They have 2 invocations that happen. They just had the fall invocation. Of course, with COVID, they had to cut back on the ceremony, but it happens at the Blair Athol Castle. And it is actually, we just initiated Mr. Ron Welsh, who's the master blender for us at Beam Suntory. And great to see him being honored as a keeper of the Quake. And the Quake, in case people are wondering, is one of those silver welcoming cups. We've got one there.
Oh, we do.
Excellent.
I had to get one when I was in Scotland.
Yes, so it's a 2-handed drinking vessel, and the story behind it is if a stranger arrives at the home, you pour a dram of whiskey as a welcoming. It's a welcoming cup, but it's 2-handled, so you can't pull your knife out. So it's a double-edged cup, I might say.
Keeps everyone on their best behavior.
Exactly.
Oh, well, I wish I could share an actual dram with you folks in person, but at least we're still able to do things virtually. That's pretty cool. So we are tasting 6 whiskeys from 5 brands. Why, Simon, did you choose these 6 particular scotches for us tonight?
Well, 5 being the 5 distilleries that we represent, but we wanted to spice it up a little bit with a second Laphroaig, just to show some variation in the style between the 10-year and the quarter cask. But these 6 whiskeys for me embrace really what's kind of quintessential about the region as well as the distilleries themselves. They are what we call our core range within our portfolio, whether it be Auchentoshan Three Wood, which I think is a classic lowland style. And then you move up into the Highlands with Ardmore and Glengiri. Sometimes people think that we are a Speyside single malt, but we are on the eastern side of the ridge. If we were on the western side of the ridge, we would technically be a Speyside, but we are Highland whiskies with Glengiri and Ardmore. And then, of course, from the west and the west coast and the islands, we've got the 2 distilleries, Bowmore and Laphroaig. Bowmore 12, again, classic. The Ardmore Legacy and Founders Reserve are the core ranges for us for those 2 Highland whiskies. And then our second biggest seller after our Laphroaig 10-year is Laphroaig quarter cask. And just to show you how flavor changes by manipulating the different types of casks that we use.
Very cool. And I know Rob is a huge peat lover. If you've read any of his reviews, you know how much he really just gets into the peat. And I'm so excited to be on this journey because I am just recently getting into peated whiskeys. And these two guys have so much knowledge and experience. So it's going to be really fun to dig into those. But we are starting with an unpeated. And I was very excited when Simon said we were going to be tasting this one because the Auchentoshan Three Wood was the very first Scotch I had when I visited Scotland. I went to a wee pub to hear some live music, and I didn't know much about Scotch, but I just asked the bartender for a good Scotch that she would recommend for someone who is new to this. And she poured me the Three Wood, and this is the first time I've had it since then. So I'm very excited. So Simon, what can you tell us about this one and also cheers. Let's raise a glass to Simon and Rob and Whiskey Wednesday nights. Slàinte.
Slàinte, cheers.
Cheers.
Well, so Auchentoshan, first of all, you had mentioned it was it's one of the first ones that you tasted. If you fly into Glasgow Airport, it's one of the closest distilleries to get to. So if you're in a hurry to try a whiskey once you arrive in Scotland, Auchentoshan is a great recommendation because it's close to the airport. It is located in the Clyde River Valley. It was established in 1823 by the founder John Bullock, and it is below what's called the Highland Line, which is a geographical designation between the lowlands and the highlands of Scotland. It's an actual ridge that runs from east to west and bisects across Scotland. And so the land changes, topography changes, you get more highs in the highland regions. The lowland regions are much lighter style, grain, grassy notes. There's a lot of calcium carbonate, a lot of chalk in the water. So the whiskeys are very dry in the lowlands. You don't need a heavy, bigger, robust style whiskey in the lowlands because of that moderate climate. So so this is a perfect style for somebody who's maybe just starting to explore the single malt category, but also for the whiskey aficionados. There's some complexity to it, and certainly with this whiskey, the Three Wood, which I consider a classic lowland single malt. Now, Auchentoshan, there's a wee bit of a twist with Auchentoshan, is that it is triple distilled. We are currently the only distillery that triple distills every drop of what we produce, and that is more similar historically to an Irish style of whiskey, although not all Irish whiskey is triple distilled. We represent a couple of Irish whiskeys, Connemara, Tyrconnell, and those are double distilled. As you distill multiple times, you also increase the spirit strength. Most single malts are distilled double distillation at around 67 to 69% ABV, and then water is added before filling in casks. But Auchentoshan takes it one step further and triple distills, so it's coming off the spirit still at about 81 to 82% ABV. That's pretty strong, pretty high strength. But what that allows us to do is that purity of spirit allows us to pull more out of the wood, because 70% of the flavor of single malt Scotch comes from its time in the barrels. And so where we are able to affect flavor is in the maturation. And so Auchentoshan Triple Wood, Three Wood, starts off in bourbon, and then it goes into Oloroso sherry casks, and it's bourbon and Pedro Jimenez sherry casks as well, and then that's married. So there's those three layers of sweetness: the bourbon cask, the vanilla, the caramel notes. Oloroso sherry, you're getting more of the dried raisin notes, and then the PX cask is you're getting that real sweetness, what we like to call gloopy.
Is that a technical term?
That's a technical term.
Yeah.
Yeah, those fruits that richness. It's definitely the raisins and dried cherries and like a candied orange in there, really mixed with some great chocolate tones.
Yeah,
This
all
new-
all
this-
favorite flavors to the Scots.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I love it just based on the nose.
And Auchentoshan means the corner of the field, because that's where the boys were hiding the distillery. It was in the corner of the field. A lot of times, the names of the distilleries will tell you where the boys were hiding their stills. Ardmore means the high place. Glengiri means the valley of the granary. Bowmore is the big bend.
Oh, wow.
And Laphroaig is the hollow by the bay. There was no GPS, no Waze back then. So the name of the whiskey kind of gave you an idea of where the boys were making their whiskey.
Oh, that's
Not
very,
giving away too much information. You don't want the excise man catching you.
that's very true.
So I'm going to offer you a toast.
Mm.
And this is a Lowland toast, a Robbie Burns toast. May the best you've ever seen be the worst you'll ever see. May our moose never leave your pantry with a teardrop in his eye. May you all be hale and hearty till you're old enough to die. I wish you all the best, as I wish you all to be. Slanja. Cheers.
Slanja.
Cheers.
Delightful. I've never heard that one before. I love it.
We're starting off with
Ooh.
probably the most sherried whiskey of the evening. There are the others that we're tasting. There are combinations of sherry, but not as heavily. And there's a real beautiful mouthfeel, a real viscous oiliness to it.
Yeah, it's
Um,
really
yeah,
it's really big. It's almost chewy by how much is going on and all the different notes. It's lovely.
Yeah, it's definitely very rich. There's a great like that raisin and cocoa flavor that plays against the wood really nicely. I know I've had this before and I do love it. It's really good, though I can never find it. But this is it is just really delicious.
And also,
It
look
is
at
a
that.
little bit more limited. If you want to try something that's a variation of Auchentoshan, we've also got one called American Oak, which is aged in first fill American oak barrels. When we say first fill, what we mean by that is they've been used once for bourbon, and then they'll send them over to us and we'll reuse them. We like to recycle. We're thrifty Scots.
Yes, you are. Yeah, I actually tried the American the other day and it was lovely. It was, to me, a lot lighter than this. This is a big whiskey. That one seemed much lighter and easier going.
Yeah, particularly if you're a bourbon drinker and you're considering the single malt category, but the likes of a Laphroaig scare the hell out of you. So American Auchentoshan just in general is a great recommendation, but it's something that you may want to consider depending on what you normally drink. If you're a bourbon drinker, I would say, and you want to try something similar, try the bourbon casked single malts. If you're more of a wine drinker, then you maybe head towards more of the sherry casked single malt. So I find a lot of wine drinkers enjoy this one.
Yeah.
Also a lot of cigar smokers as well, because this goes really nicely with a nice rich cigar.
Yeah, that would pair quite nicely. Just, oh man, this is so rich. Also, the color. Now, I didn't look on the box, but is this colored at all? Tell us about this, or is it just from the casks?
No, this will have E150A in it with caramel coloring. What that is for folks who don't know what E150A is, it's a coloring to keep it consistent, keep the color consistent. It is not affecting flavor whatsoever, but it is just a very small drop of it will keep consistency of color, because first and foremost, we shop with our eyes. and if there's variations, that came about along with chill filtration, had come about in the early half of the 20th century. When whiskeys were being shipped all over the world, they go through a big temperature change, and there are fatty acids in the whiskey that congeal, and you get what you call a bloom or a blush. Turns cloudy. Nothing wrong with it. Perfectly natural organic reaction. But from a marketing perspective, you go to buy a bottle of whiskey and it's cloudy, or if there's variation in the colors, you may, well, I don't think I'll buy that. So that's when they started using chill filtration and caramel coloring. Chill filtration, you bring down the temperature of the spirit down to 5 degrees, filter it through a fine microfiber of paper, and that draws out the fatty acids so it doesn't congeal, so it doesn't flocculate. God forbid it should flocculate. But then over the last 20 plus years, as single malts were becoming more and more popular, people started looking at their whiskeys and saying, well, perhaps in chill filtering, you're also filtering out some of the flavors as well with those fatty acids, those fatty oils. And so that's why a lot of distilleries have gone back to non-chill filtered. Unless, well, if you're some of the countries, it does have to be labeled if E150A is added, but it is not required to list it here in the United States.
So I did have a quick question. It isn't directly related to Auchentoshan, but how do you balance working with smaller brands like this versus a large beast like a Laphroaig?
Well, yeah, Laphroaig is the #1 selling Islay single malt, but Auchentoshan produces about 2 million liters of spirit a year, which is a reasonable size. Laphroaig produces about 3.3 million liters. So these are medium-sized distilleries. You look at the likes of Ardmore, where they're one of the largest producing distilleries, but most of that is used for blending purposes. So all of the distilleries have their place in the portfolio. Auchentoshan, Laphroaig has become as popular as it's become because the peated whiskeys have become popular. And honestly, I think you're going to see a turnaround. People are going to look, literally look south and southeast and look to the lowlands, because there are more lowland distilleries being reopened, like Rosebank, but also new distilleries like the Clydeside distillery in Glasgow, which is being run by the former distillery manager at Auchentoshan. There are quite a few distilleries being built in the lowlands. I think you're going to see lowlands as kind of the next region potentially in the next 10 to 15 years. So, and I say 10 to 15 years, that seems like a long way away, but when you look at the timeline of Scotch distilleries, the likes of Bowmore 1779 and Laphroaig at 1815, and Auchentoshan will be celebrating in 2023. It will be celebrating its 200-year anniversary. So
that snuck up.
So there should be some great Auchentoshan anniversary bottlings coming out. Keep an eye out for those in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. So you've been with Beam Suntory for over 13 years. How has your role evolved? Because you said you had started when being a brand ambassador was relatively new for the entire industry. Have you seen a lot of changes and growth? I would just be interested in hearing about how things were at the start and how they've progressed and changed.
Yeah, obviously the ambassador program is an extension of the marketing, but what I continue to do is grow and learn myself, because as the industry became more and more, as the category became more and more popular, and with the internet, people became more and more knowledgeable. And so it was important to understand the production in its minutiae, in all its details, as well as the stories, because ultimately whiskey is about storytelling. And some of my best friends in the industry come from, like myself, come from an artist background, from a performance background, because it's about telling a story. It's about telling a story of these whiskeys, as well as the people who make the whiskey. Because when you get a chance to come over to our distilleries and meet the people, you really start to understand the character of the whiskey. And that's really important. So for me, it through the years, understanding the history and the regionality, but also understanding the people and the land itself. You know, one of the things I encourage people to do when they come to visit our distilleries, which are currently are open but in a limited capacity because of COVID. They are, depending on the distillery, and it also depends on the space itself. If for example, the visitor centers are much bigger, taller ceilings, it makes things a little bit easier for air circulation, and that way they're able to allow more people into the distillery. Laphroaig is a challenge because we have a very low ceilinged, very cozy, which is what you need when you're on Isla, very cozy lounge. But technically, it makes it very difficult from a safety perspective in these times of ventilation and good circulating air. So, but I digressed. When you come to visit the distilleries, explore the land around the distilleries, because you'll understand more about what affects and informs the styles and the flavors and the maturations, as well as the distillation. The difference between being up at Ardmore, one of the highest elevation distilleries in Scotland, versus at sea level with Laphroaig and Bowmore, that's affecting it's affecting maturation, but it's also affecting distillation as well. Different pressures at different altitudes, and that's going to change the way whiskeys are produced slightly. In the same way you get producing whiskey in the hollers of Kentucky with our whiskey partners, the likes of Maker's Mark and Jim Beam, versus something like a Stranahan's in Colorado, up in Mile High in Denver. That's going to influence, really inform a lot of the decisions and the style of the spirits that are being produced.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we jump into our second tasting, we have a question from a Whisket Network member and a contributor, Mark Pruitt. He is wondering, because we've been talking about distilleries and how new ones were popping up and expanding. Do you think we're going to continue to see smaller distilleries crop up and find success in this kind of niche market, or do you think more consolidation is going to happen and distilleries are going to be consolidated into one or under one umbrella, or go get mothballed?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a combination. There has been a growth of distilleries. Some of it's been slowed down by COVID, but prior to that, there really was a renaissance of distillation on a global scale. And we've seen new distilleries in Scotland today. We have over 130 different single malt distilleries in Scotland, as well as rye whiskey distilleries and We have new rum distilleries. And if you're looking to start up a distillery, my recommendation is wait a few years, because I think that you may see a fire sale on stills, because sometimes I think people get into it maybe not for the best intentions, and they're looking for a quick turnaround. And single malt Scotch is not. It's about a long-term plan. It's not about a quick rich scheme.
Yeah.
And it's about matter of being patient. It takes 10 years to make Laphroaig. I ask that you take more than 10 seconds to enjoy it. But in this workaday world where you can order something online right now and have it within 24 hours at your doorstep, there's expectations for a quick turnaround, but it takes time to build the character of the spirit, as well. And a lot of these young distilleries, it's young spirit, and you need to give it time. Of course, if it's not good spirit, time in the barrel is not going to make it better.
Yeah.
But the good whiskeys out there are definitely going to get even better and better with time. I think in an Isla example is Kilchoman, great little distillery. They're into their 12th year now, and the whiskey just keeps getting better and better. But you got to start with good spirit, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on to another fantastic spirit. Our second tasting, the Glengiri Founders Reserve. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I did read that Glengiri is the most easterly situated distillery in the world. Is that true?
It is correct. There is one other distillery that is being built that will be further easterly, but currently we are the easternmost distillery in the mainland of Scotland.
Oh, nice. Well, let's drink to that. Tell us a little bit about it.
You said it perfectly. The challenge for this one, as with Auchentoshan, and many single malt whiskeys, is just pronouncing the name can be the challenge. And I assure you, a couple whiskeys in, it gets much easier to pronounce.
Oh,
but
right.
it is Garioch.
Yeah, so
pronounced Glengiri, of course.
Of course. But why? Why are Scotch words difficult for?
Well, because a lot of it's the Scots Gaelic. It's the Scots Gaelic language, which is not a very easy language to speak and or understand. But in this region of Aberdeenshire, it's made even more difficult by what's considered really a fourth language dialect in Scotland, and that's the Doric language. The Athenians back in the Greek times, they considered the Dorians as the Athenians were cosmopolitan, the Dorians were considered rustics. So the Doric language in Aberdeenshire is definitely more of a local dialect. And you've got terms like, there's a fantastic term that's Doric that's called, refers to the cold, wet, and windy weather, which you find a lot in Scotland, and that's Dreich.
It sounds appropriate.
Dreich. It's a Dreich day. And so that's when you drink this amazing whiskey, Glengiri Founders Reserve. This pays tribute to the Manson family, not the same as at least I don't know, but at least not in our records are they related. But the Manson family, they were merchants and farmers. The Glengiri means the valley of the granary, And so it's a very rich grain growing region. Some of the best barley in Scotland is grown in this region. And this distillery is located in the little town of Old Meldrum. It's located right in the heart of the town. A lot of our distilleries are located out in isolated areas, but this is right in the middle of town, and has gone through a lot of challenging times through the years. We lost our water source, and I think, you know, Glengiri is a great testament to the stick-to-itiveness of the Scots, and particularly of the ones in these regions. Every distillery has its own water source, and so we ran dry from 69 to 73, and Kenny Grant, the distillery manager, employed a diviner with a water witch to locate the next the water source for Glengiri. And that lasted about 25 years until the mid-90s. And then that water source ran dry again. At this point, the distillery shut down. And then when it was purchased in 96 by Suntory, the Japanese group, they reopened it. But they used unpeated barley. Up to this point, Glengiri was primarily using Highland peated barley. Now everybody associates peat with the Islay whiskeys, with the West Coast, but Highland whiskeys employed peat in the drying process as well. But peat is natural organic material that's the local vegetation. So the peat in the Highlands is more decomposed pine trees. The peat on the island of Islay is more decomposed seaweed. So it's like the difference between sitting around a campfire in the forest versus sitting around a bonfire on the beach. So peated Highland whiskies are more of that forest campfire. But what we have with this Founders Reserve is a marriage of bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks that will range between 5 to 10 years old. And the sherry really is a beautiful top notes of those dark fruit notes. Then you've also got the vanilla butteriness of the bourbon casks. And it's interesting to note that one of the owners at Glengiri, a Masterson, William Sanderson was his name, was actually one of the first references to, one of the first printed references to the influence of maturation, the influence of time in the barrel. It is written that he had said, "It is well known that whiskey stored in sherry cask soon acquires a mellow softness, which it does not get when put into new casks. I thought it was going to be much more romantic, but basically it was an accident that sherry butts color a mature whiskey." And this was 1864.
Oh, wow.
And this is when the sherry casks were being used primarily because of the phylloxera plague wiped out all the vineyards of France. There was no brandy available. So that's when sherry became the drink of fashion, and that's when the sherry casks were being used.
Yeah.
So
I'm getting a big honey note.
Yeah,
like,
that's that classic Highland Glengiri.
Yeah, I also get like a lot, the fruit influence is a lot lighter here.
Yeah, compared to the Auchentoshan.
Like ripe red apples kind of thing.
Yeah, the Auchentoshan is a bit more of a sherry bomb. This now you're getting more orchard fruits.
Yeah.
And the cat likes it too.
Yeah, if you can hear the cat screaming, sorry.
Memories all alone in the moonlight.
Yeah, see your people.
So I'll offer you a toast. This is a toast. This is a Doric toast. So New Year's is also known as Hogmanay in Scotland. It's a huge party, and traditionally the villages, everybody would open the doors if they're having a party, open up the back door to let out the bad spirits of the old year, and open the front door to welcome the new spirits, the good spirits of the new year. And so everybody would travel around the town, and they would carry with them a lump of coal or a lump of peat to keep the homeowner's house warm all year long. And then you carry a bottle of whiskey to keep the homeowner warm all year long. So the toast is this, and it is Lang may your lum reek, which means long may your chimney smoke. Because if there's smoke coming out of the chimney, that means that there's a fire in the fireplace, it's keeping you warm, and it's you're able to cook your food. So Lang may your lum reek.
Cheers.
Whoa. That's definitely, it's rich, but lighter, in a lighter way than the Auchentoshan. And it, again, like the nose, seems to me a lot more grain forward. It really gives a sense of place. That terroir of the Highlands is really coming through to me.
Yeah, I'm also getting some like strawberry licorice on this one as well.
Interesting.
Never had strawberry licorice.
It's fantastic.
What I find surprising is just how rich this is compared to the nose. Because the nose was, honey doesn't really get that rich, and ripe red apples really aren't. But it's like here you get more of the sherry influence with the darker fruits, the cocoa, that kind of thing. And it's actually kind of surprising on the palate in a good way.
Yeah, the bourbon, you get more of the bourbon influence in the nose.
Yeah.
And then you're getting the sherry influence on the palate.
Oh, yeah. It's also very playful, it seems. Doesn't seem to take itself too seriously, but it's very approachable.
Well, Glengiri, it makes you cheery. It's when you come to visit, we actually have just done some major changes at the distillery, including direct fire stills. We've removed our internal steam coils and have gone back to an earlier style of heating our stills with direct fire stills now. And we're also in the process of putting floor maltings back in.
Oh, cool.
At Glengiri, and because of the shipping issues that everybody's having these days, it's delayed. We were hoping to be able to have our maltings up and running for just past week. We had Prince Charles, His Royal Highness, visited the distillery, but the maltings aren't going to be operational until January. But it's a very exciting time for what I consider our little hidden gem in Glengiri.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question and I want to shove on in here, since you did mention Stranahans. And it's funny that people are mentioning Stranahans because I had Stranahans earlier today, so that was very exciting. It's delicious. And Mark is wondering, how do American single malts differ from those being produced in Scotland?
Well, I think definitely terroir and regionality. I think they are more similar than different because they're using the same grain. I think what makes them unique is the region that they're producing them in, the likes of Stranahans or Westland, good folks up in Pacific Northwest. I think what is happening is that in the way that we like to talk about regionality of single malt scotches from lowlands to highlands to Speyside to Islay. I think with the success of the whiskey micro distillation in the United States, that you're going to see a regionality to the whiskeys in the U.S. Pacific Northwest. I mean, because there already are, and there was regionality before all of this happened, because there was Maryland, Pennsylvania rye, where some of the original whiskeys being produced in pre-revolutionary U.S. Was Pennsylvania rye, and there was Maryland rye. And then, of course, as settlers moved west, you got Kentucky, and you got Western Pennsylvania versus Eastern Pennsylvania, and of course Tennessee. But now also today, you've also got Texas. You've got the Garrison brothers in Texas. You've got distillers all over the U.S. And if they are able to hang on during these challenging times, I think that you're going to see, and of course Hudson, the Hudson distillery, one of the early micro distilleries, really laid down the foundation for the success. The challenge, I think, is just being smaller. The economic challenges are much greater when you don't have the support of a multinational corporation such as Beam Suntory.
Yeah, that would help.
Yes,
it would help. It sometimes there's also beauty and independence and the ability to do what you want rather than to have to bend to the larger powers that be.
Yeah.
I've actually written about this several times because I am a craft whiskey lover as well, or technically all whiskey at this point. But the difference with some of these local distillers is they have this just rabid fan base that can keep them afloat during COVID, but also just they can take those risks where some of the larger brands just can't take that risk as quickly because, and especially from Scotch perspective, it's really hard to make a really good Scotch under 8 years old. Whereas you have some of these places, and Balcones is actually one of my favorites down in Texas. They have a single malt that's only like 3 years old. But because of the whole Texas weather thing, it's a very different thing. And seeing the risks that these people take, a local distillery near me has done some things that they have a 4-grain that is actually not wheat, it's oats.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said earlier, the first few years they struggled a bit as they were growing, and they've hit their sweet spot. They're about 7 years old right now, and they've had a 4-year bottled in bond 4-grain whiskey that is actually fantastic. But it took them a while to get there because playing with a different grain like oats is something you have to learn.
Yeah. And as Simon said earlier, good things take time. Good whiskey takes time. It's a patience.
And to your point, Rob, it's a lot of trial and error for the early years. We have the luxury, the likes of Laphroaig and these distilleries that are over 200 years old. We have the luxury of a lot of trial and error. But also we are a good example of how you can be successful. And so with a lot of fortitude and a lot of elbow grease, and I know there's a lot of people out there who are making amazing whiskeys. You talk about Pennsylvania, Liberty Pole, I think, is a great example. They've got a great story in Western Pennsylvania with the whiskey rebellion, and they make peaty whiskeys as well as the classic Monongahela style rye.
Well, speaking of peat, Bill Varnell, one of the co-founders of WBC and Whisket Network, chimed in with that he definitely prefers Highland peat over Islay peat. And I think that leads us perfectly into our third tasting of the Ardmore Legacy, which is a lightly peated whiskey from the Highlands. So tell us a bit more about this. And also, the Legacy, doesn't it celebrate the distillery's unique location?
Yeah, Ardmore Legacy. This was the second official commercial bottling of Ardmore. After we purchased the Allied Domecq brands, Laphroaig, it was a number of brands. It was Courvoisier, Maker's Mark, Sauza Tequila, Teachers Highland Cream Blended Scotch, which is a fantastic blended Scotch. If you can buy it locally, get it. It's great. It's a higher peated recipe. So it's a single malt whiskey lovers blend. But with the purchase of the Teachers came the Ardmore distillery, which was one of the larger distilleries in Scotland. But 99.9% of Ardmore that was being produced at the time was going into Teachers. It was being used for the blend. But it was only at 60% capacity. So Beam ramped up production to 100% capacity, and then started producing and bottling the first official commercial bottling for Ardmore, which was Ardmore Traditional Cask, which included some 14-year-old liquids, some younger liquids, but a fully peated Highland whiskey. Fully peated, in this case, as you were saying there, Julia, is a fully peated Highland peat, which it runs around 15 parts per million. Now, there was no peat in the Glengiri that we just tasted, and obviously there's no peat in Auchentoshan in that lowland whiskey. But this runs at about 22 parts per million, 15 parts per million, which is about the same smokiness as you would find in Connemara, our peated Irish whiskey. But Legacy came about as a result of the style, because we were a direct fire, coal-fired stills. We were one of the last direct fire stills, coal-fire stills in Scotland. Many of them converted to steam because there were fires, and of course we had a fire in our still house, so we had to shut down, and we replaced the coal fires direct, basically stoking coal fires underneath the bottom of the pot stills with internal steam coils. And when they put the steam coils in, they actually dented the steam coils so that it would produce an uneven distribution of heat, similar to the way coal fire stills would distill, because you would have pockets of heat, and it wouldn't be, the trick was to really keep it as balanced, as even as possible. But truth of the matter was there were hot spots. And so those dents in the coils simulated the hot spots of the direct fire. So that legacy of the direct fire stills is celebrated in this bottling, because what happened was when we got the stills up and running again after putting in the new steam coils, we used an unpeated barley to prime the stills, and it was actually a pretty good spirit. We called it Ardlair, named after a standing stone which is nearby the distillery. So what the Legacy bottling is, it's a marriage of the peated Ardmore and the unpeated Ardlair. So it's kind of the new spirit versus the old spirit, and a marriage of both. So all bourbon casks. So lots of vanilla caramel notes on this. There's a spiciness to it.
I'm getting a really, and it could be because I have a bit of a head cold, so it always changes things, but grilled lemon. Anyone else? Am I just having a stroke here? But
I think that's the influence of the Ardlair, the unpeated barley.
Yeah, I can definitely get like a light citrus note. I'm not sure about quite that far, but
I mean, It's fantastic. I've never gotten that particular scent on a whiskey before, and I always love smelling something new in a whiskey or a wine. And yeah,
So
you
here's
could,
the toast.
yeah.
Of course.
May there be no hell, and if there is, I'll see you at the bar. Cheers.
Cheers.
That might be my new favorite one.
Now, of course, we've all been drinking our whiskey neat, but you may want to add some water to these whiskeys. You can add water directly, putting a couple of drops in, or the other way of adding water to the whiskey is this. You can marry the water and whiskey in your mouth. So my recommendation is have a little bit of water like this, and then a little bit of whiskey. So a little bit.
Yeah, let's give that a go.
Because for me, it brings out a lot more of the floral notes on this one. And the great thing about it is when you do it this way, if you prefer your whiskey neat, you still have it that way.
Oh, that's very true. You're so clever. Hey, Bill, you would like this. It is very lightly peated. Yeah, give it a try because you'll like this. Just so you know.
And the great thing, and you've got it behind you there. I can see the tube behind your left shoulder. The Ardmore tube has got a
somewhere. Yeah,
yeah.
There.
It's a great topographical map. So there's an eagle featured on it because we represent we support the Royal Society Protection of Birds in the UK, and we sponsor an eagle, the sea eagle, and her name is Ardmore, and she can literally fly from coast to coast in a day, catching the things. And if you get lost and you need to know where the distillery is, it shows you right there on the little red, right along the, which right also there. Points out the railway line, and that's why it was built where it was built, is because it was built on the railway line. Ardmore is a great example of the second wave of whiskey production in Scotland when the railways and the roads came in. We'll be moving over to Islay next, and really the transportation for those distilleries were ships, because those were the highways of the day back then. But Ardmore, it was built by William Teacher of Teacher's Whiskey on a railway line, so he could get the grain in and get the whiskey out as quickly as possible.
Rob, did you have anything before we move along to Bowmore?
Actually, a question back to the direct fire stills. Sorry, Julia, going off script here. Because you've mentioned it now twice. So how does the direct fire still affect the whiskey itself as opposed to the steam? Is there anything besides like the heat pockets?
Yeah, it gives us a chance. It creates what's called the Maillard reaction, which is similar to what you do with chocolate or coffee, like a roasting flavors. It gives us the ability to affect flavor more in a toasting and roasting kind of way. So honestly, I think the stills have been up and running under the direct fire process for a couple of months now. So it'll be interesting to see how also the angle of the line arms have changed. It'll be interesting to see how the spirit evolves with these new innovations for us at Glengiri, because we don't want to lose all that's good about it, but we think there's some opportunity to increase depth of flavor by utilizing these direct fire stills as well as doing the floor maltings.
Very cool.
Very cool.
There you go.
I needed my geek moment. I'm sorry.
You're apologizing for me. Yeah, I love the geek out. It's great. I'm sure we have a lot of whiskey networkers who also love geeking out. Speaking of geeking out, moving along to the Bowmore 12, anyone who has read the Whiskey Network, they should probably already know quite a bit about the Bowmore, because if they've read Mark's interview with the legendary Jim McEwen, he went way in depth about Bowmore's history and everything that Jim did. That's in the July 2021 issue. If you haven't, or if you want to just go back and read a really good article, go do that. So Jim was probably there before your time, but do you have any, have you ever crossed paths with him since, or do you have any interesting stories about Bowmore?
Absolutely. Jim is one of the legends of the industry. He's one of the storytellers that I respected what he's done, as well as the work that he's done to open not only the likes of Bowmore, but also then, well, he didn't open, or he's not that old. But his tenure at Bowmore really were defining years for Bowmore. And then he moved over literally across the bay to Bruichladdich to reopen Bruichladdich, and then has since opened the newest distillery on Isla, Ardmore, and has served as a consultant for that distillery. It is he really was not only a showman, but also he is an incredibly hospitable man, and he speaks of whiskey like music, and he is able to wax poetically the whiskey experience, whether that be of the people at the distillery or of the liquid itself. And he understands it implicitly, and it's something that I respect greatly about the man, and have been privileged to spend some evenings with him on Isla, as well as in the United States when he was traveling and promoting his whiskeys in the US. Just a great ambassador for Scotland.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's wonderful. Cheers to that.
So the Bowmore 12 is really a classic Isla whiskey. And it's a great example, again, talking about the difference in regions. When you look at the island of Isla, which is 20 miles by 25 miles across, you've got the southern part of the island, which is where what's called the Godalton Parish. That's where you've got the likes of Laphroaig and Lagavulin and Ardbeg. And then you've got the central portion of the island where you've got Bowmore, and across the bay, across the loch, you've got Bruichladdich. A little bit further northwest, Kilcoman. And then up in the north region of the island, you've got Kalila and Bunnahabhain and now Ardmore. So the Bowmore kind of represents that mid-range of Isla peat, because in terms of the peat, we were talking about the 15 parts per million of Ardmore from the Highlands. Bowmore runs about 22 parts per million of the phenol, the phenolic quality, for a couple of reasons. Because of the location of Lochindal, it's not as doesn't face the elements as much as the whiskey distilleries in the southern portion of the island do, which are kind of stuck out in the middle of the Atlantic. Also, the way we dry our barley at Bowmore, we use peated fires, but we get the fires going hot at Bowmore and then dry the barley over the heat and the heat and the smoke at the same time. At Laphroaig, we get the fires going hot, and then we would let the peat die down, and we pack peat onto it again, and it smolders. It's what we call a cold smoke peat. So that's absorbed differently into the barley than the heat plus the peat, the way Bowmore does. So it's not as heavily funky, marshy, swampy, smoky as Laphroaig is.
Yeah.
And this 12-year uses a combination of bourbon and sherry. It's 90% bourbon barrels and 10% sherry. So basically, for every 9 barrels of bourbon casked Bowmore, we're going to put in 1 sherry cask Bowmore. And so they're all aging at the same time, but then we marry. It's what we call it's parallel maturation. It's all happening at the same time.
Definitely compared to the Ardmore, the Bowmore has that sea tang is much more prominent. It's almost saltier. That seaweed kind of briny aspect comes through.
Oh, well, yeah, because they're Ardmore's inland highland. So yeah, to your point is the Bowmore side by side, it highlights the smoke and the maritime, the salinity of the whiskey. So much so that one of the things we enjoy with Bowmore 12-year is a little tasty treat sensation called the Bowmore Oyster Luge. So you sip the oyster brine, and then you sip the whiskey, and it shows you how the brine will influence the flavor of the whiskey and vice versa. And then you eat the oyster, and then you pour your whiskey into the oyster shell, and you luge on.
Oh, wow.
The original shot glass.
Should have told us to get oysters before.
I know.
All right.
So here's the toast with the Bowmore 12. I must go down to the sea today, to the lonely sea in the sky, and all I ask is an Islay cask and the friends to drink it dry. Slàinte, Bowmore 12.
Slàinte.
Cheers.
I think I need a bigger sip.
You can definitely tell the bourbon cask here.
Yeah, this is kind of the opposite, where you get the saltiness and the salinity and the sherry sweetness in the nose, but on the taste, on the palate with this one, you get more of the bourbon notes. And another fun pairing with this is vanilla ice cream.
Oh.
Just drizzle a little bit of this over vanilla ice cream. It's fantastic. It's so good.
I'm surprised because this is only 40%, and some of the other ones were 43 or 48. This one seems a little bit hotter to me. There's a bit more spice underneath it.
Well, I think that's a little bit of the Islay spice.
Yeah, I've typically found that and specifically with almost all the Islay whiskeys, because of that salty, briny flavor, it just comes off a little warmer for whatever reason. Though I do get fascinated with the different style of smoke you get from all of these. Like Laphroaig is going to be completely different, but the smoke on the nose is almost like a charcoal quality to it, as opposed to, I don't remember off the top of my head what Laphroaig smelled like. I mean, obviously that's more campfire kind of thing, but like Ardbeg goes almost ashy in their smoke. So it's very interesting to see the difference, even though they're all Islay, all peated, but
and
just the nuances.
I think there was a comment earlier on about a Highland peat versus Islay peated whiskies, but there's a huge range of styles of Islay peat, depending on, again, the location on Islay, but also the type of casks that are being used. We like bourbon casks at Laphroaig primarily because bourbon casks will highlight smoke. Sherry casks cut the smoke, and you get more of the dark fruit influence, which really cuts some of that smoke back. And Bowmore tends to use more sherry casks because that's historically what we've used it at Bowmore. Bowmore also has the distinction of being the oldest licensed distillery on the island of Islay, 1779, and the second oldest licensed distillery in Scotland. It's that number one vaults is the oldest licensed whiskey vaults in Scotland. And we were talking about location before. The number one vaults is below sea level. When you are in the number one vaults, you look up a couple of meters high, and you will see a water line, which you're right along the shoreline there. Now, it never gets floods in the warehouse, but it will. You can slosh around in the water and groundwater, but that's going to affect the way the whiskeys age compared to Kentucky Rick warehouses. Hot summers, cold winters, the barrels contract and expand at a much faster rate compared to cooler, damper Scotland and cool, damp Islay, where you're below sea level. It really slows down maturation. And that's why we can allow our whiskeys to age 25, 30, 50 years, because time stops in those warehouses. But even though the time may stop, the maturation really does change in a beautifully, almost slow motion way, because of the influence of the climate, the microclimate in the warehouse.
Yeah, I'm really loving it has such a nice long finish, and different notes are coming through. It's this gently savory peppered meat, almost like a peppered turkey vibe. That's really lovely. I just love how long that finish is on this.
Yeah. Well, when it's raining 330 days a year horizontally, you need something to take the chill out of your bones.
That is very true. And Bill has another comment chiming in about it's the coastal harvested peat that he finds medicinal flavors that he's not crazy about.
Yeah, my question for was it Bill?
Bill, yeah.
My question for Bill is where his roots are, because what I find that globally people will gravitate towards the single malt region that is similar to either where they live, where they grew up, or where their family roots are.
Really?
Yeah.
So, like, meaning if someone grew up on the seaside, they would be more into Islas versus if they were a coastal person, they'd be more into Spaysides?
Yeah, it's totally non-scientific, but and it's maybe maybe conjectured after a few whiskeys or two, but
I don't know if Bill is southeastern PA from the beginning. I know I am, and I love Islay whiskey, so I'm not sure how that all relates.
There you go. Blew that out of the water.
Sorry.
I'll drink to that, Rob.
Right.
Cheers.
And while you're having that drink, I'll ask a quick question. So I was introduced to Bowmore at least 5 years ago, when there was still the small batch, which I believe was finished in like rum casks or something. And I loved that whiskey, but now that Bowmore has revamped and rebranded its core line to be 12, 15, 18 years, how has that affected the popularity of Bowmore at this point?
Yeah, the small batch was actually bourbon casks.
Oh, bourbon cask. Okay.
And technically it wasn't small batch, so that's why we stopped.
I'm just going by the label.
Yeah, no, I
like
know.
There are no legalities around small batch.
Well,
Yeah.
the idea behind the 12, 15, as well as the 18-year and 25-year, we've got a 30-year that's out now. The numbers have long been important for us at Bowmore. You know, oldest licensed distillery on Islay, the #1 vaults. We have looked at promoting, because a lot of distilleries have gone to no age statement whiskeys. We've tasted up to now this evening, all of them are no age statement whiskeys. This was the first aged one, and a lot of people think that's the no age statement whiskeys are shortcuts, that we're trying to get it to market sooner. But actually, no age statement whiskeys are a marriage of different barrels from different years. It's more historically accurate to the way whiskey was bottled and sold back in the 19th century. They weren't sitting around waiting 12 years back then. They were bottling it right from the barrel, or they were marrying different barrels to create new flavor profiles. So that's my take on no age statement whiskeys. And I would love to do one of these big whiskey festivals where the whole first half of the evening, everything is in a nondescript bottle or bag. Nobody knows what it is. They know what brand it is, but they don't know which expression it is. And the categories with me. And
yeah, she does.
And then the second half of the evening is the unmasking. And I think people will be greatly surprised as to whiskeys that they thought were older whiskeys are going to be no age statement whiskeys. It's all about, and it all comes down to flavor. But a lot of times people will say, give me the oldest you got, because that must mean it's the best. And we all know that's not true.
Yeah, I've actually gotten to the point on Whisket Network, any of the reviews that I write anymore tend to be side by sides, because you get to compare the notes between two different styles of whiskey, or maybe even several within the same line, where it's just really interesting to see the difference. And I've surprised myself where I would swear up and down that I liked one whiskey better, had them side by side during a review. I'm like, yeah, nope, the other one's better.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. I was like, okay, that works.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to really compare the flavors when you can, because I think you just learn more about the whiskeys.
Absolutely. And the other way to do it as well, because a lot of people get freaked out by the tasting notes. They're like, you know, I've been at a tasting as an audience member, and the presenter is waxing poetically about, ooh, this is like my grandmother's leather Bible on a Sunday morning in the sunlight. And you look out into the room and the people are like, I don't know, just smells like whiskey to me. But what I do encourage people to do is explore the dynamics of the taste experience. How does the spirit move you? And that could be orally, it could be just memory, it could be, and then also tasting it with foods, doing pairings, because that'll bring out other flavors, other facets of not only the whiskey itself, but of the food as well. It's fun to do that.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate something that Simon was going on about. It was just, when I do tastings and write these reviews, I try to keep it fairly basic if I can. You know, people know cinnamon, they know vanilla, they know honey. I actually don't know what cardamom smells like or tastes like. So I'm never going to include that in a note, because most people who are reading these things, they want to be able to connect it to something that they remember. So if you can say, okay, this, has this really interesting creme brulee type of flavor. Oh, I get that. It's this creamy custard, vanilla, maybe some other baking spices. It's like, oh, okay, I can picture that. Because if you can't picture it, you're not helping people.
And one of the fun pairings as well I like to do is cheese, because cheese, not only are you pairing flavors, but you're also there's also umami, there's mouthfeel, and you start to understand the fats that are in whiskey as well as in cheese, and it works particularly well with cask strength whiskey, because of those oils, those fatty oils that are in the cask strength whiskeys. It just gives you a whole new umami experience with whiskey and cheese.
Do you find that cask strength whiskey pairs better with soft cheeses or hard aged cheeses?
Yes.
I love it.
Have them all.
It's a very individual experience, and some of them, some of the hard northern Italian cheeses are fantastic, and there's dry qualities to it, like a manchego, but some of the blue cheese are fantastic with the, as we move towards Laphroaig, that funky quality of the mold really pairs beautifully with the kind of moldiness that you get with Laphroaig.
I had been really excited, and then you said moldy, and I'm like, that leads us perfectly into this, because oftentimes when people think of big peaty whiskeys, Laphroaig is top of the list, and some people are immediately put off by such an intense whiskey. Or when you say mold, I'm a little put off by it. So what do you say to those people who haven't experienced Laphroaig or are feeling a little trepidatious?
I say, grab your glass, Julia. All right, you ready?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to show you another way of nosing the whiskeys, because when you go into the warehouse, you have a copper dog, a long copper tube. In the wine business, called a wine thiefer or a avalanche. You knock the bung out of the bung hole, insert the copper dog, draw off your sample, put it into your glass. But if you don't have a copper dog, don't have a glass, the other way of nosing the whiskey is this. You put your hand over the opening of the barrel and roll the barrel. So put your hand over the opening of your barrel of Laphroaig 10-year and roll it. Get your palm wet. There you go.
Okay.
Wetter the better. Okay. Palm wet, glass down. Now, rub your hands together, get some heat going, some friction going. This burns off the alcohol, releases the esters, burns off the congeners. Get them nice and hot. Open the doors to the warehouse, open the barrel, and welcome to Laphroaig.
If this is the dark side, I like it already.
There you go. You see?
Ooh, again, you get that kind of salty but meaty, salted smoked meat quality.
Yeah, like bacon and lard kind of.
Yeah, just hilarious, because I don't eat that, but it smells really good.
It also it also shows you how clean it is. If we were to do this with a cognac, your hands would be very sticky from the sugars.
Oh,
and
yeah.
all the sugars consumed during fermentation. So another good reason for drinking the single malt. No bad sugar hangover, no carbohydrates, so it's Atkins friendly, good for diabetics, cure to the Zika, and it is gluten-free. Now,
it has all the markers of awesomeness.
If you're driving after this, please wash your hands. I do not want to be responsible for a night in jail. Honest officer, the Scotsman on Zoom told me to do it.
Bill chimed back in. He lives in Pennsylvania. However, he does like Laphroaig. How do we pronounce this one?
Cardass? How do you pronounce it?
Cardass?
Carchus.
Okay.
Carchus Madeira. His ancestors are from Ireland and Germany. Carchus.
There you go.
Okay, good to know.
Carchus. Okay.
So whiskey.
There's something else I've been pronouncing wrong.
We learn something new every day. Yeah. So you, Rob, you've been saying how you do side-by-side reviews. So I think it's great that we have two Laphroaigs, the 10 and the quarter cask. Tell us the differences about these two bad boys.
So the 10-year is our standard. It's the number one selling Islay single malt. What we're going to do is take 250 barrels that are 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. We're going to marry them. It's going into a marrying tank that's got 20% of the last batch. So we're maintaining consistency of flavor. And then we add water, bring it down to bottling strength, 43% here in the US. 10-year cask strength, just as an offshoot, is 100 barrels that are 10 years old. We just marry and do what we call barrier filtration, which just takes out the chunks of the cask, and then we bottle. Quarter cask is 5 to 11 years in the bourbon barrels. We marry all those, and then it goes into quarter casks for another 8 months. Quarter casks are 125 liter barrels. They're the size that 2 men could lift and put onto the side of a pack horse back in the day. So by putting it into the smaller barrel, more surface contact wood to whiskey, so you get more intense bourbon cask notes with the quarter cask. It also produces a drier quality, the quarter casks, which is an inherent flavor within the Laphroaig, classic Laphroaig.
I'm just smelling these two. I'm super surprised because
I can't believe how different they are.
Yeah, Laphroaig, I always just say, oh, it's going to be big, it's going to be peaty. The quarter cask compared to the 10, it is sweet and light. Bourbon is really shining through, and I'm hardly getting any of that peat characteristic on the nose.
It's what I like to introduce bourbon drinkers to Laphroaig with.
Ah, that's an interesting idea.
Because it is more of that bourbon sweetness.
Yeah, because...
Go ahead, Rob.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say the 10 has that typical barbecued meat, salty, briny thing going, which I do adore. There's no doubt. But then you go over to the quarter cask and you're getting like honey, creamy vanilla, graham cracker, like it's all sorts of fun.
Yeah.
You mentioned the creaminess of it. You're getting more of the wood oils with the quarter cask, and you'll definitely, that creaminess is going to be on the tongue as well. Should we do a toast?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is a toast to the boys who make, and the women who make the whiskey, all of these whiskeys, and it goes like this. Willie brewed a peck of malt, and Robin Allen came to pre. 3 blither hearts are lealing now. You wouldn't have found in christendy. We're not foo. We're not that foo. Just a drop in at e. The cock may craw and the day may daw, but we'll still drink our barley brie. Now, for those who didn't understand a word, I'll translate. It goes like this. Willie brewed some damn fine scotch, and Robin Allen came to taste it. Once uncorked, the friends confessed, not a drop will be wasted. We're not drunk. We're not that drunk. Just a little tipsy. The day may dawn, work may call, but we'll still drink our whiskey.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Now, you had said, what's the difference in ppm, or is it the same? And that the difference is the way the peat is introduced. That the 10 was hot smoked and the quarter cask, or was that something else?
No, that's the difference between Bowmore and Laphroaig. All of this spirit is coming off the still exactly the same way. What you're getting is the influence of time in the barrel and the different types of barrels that are being used. Wow.
So what's the ppm in these?
Well, it's going in, it's around 49, but at this point, it's in low 30s.
Wow. And also, as someone who is much newer to peated whiskeys, and it's still something I'm trying to understand, the difference between peat and the difference between smoke and how those are represented in the different flavor profiles. Or is there a difference? Is peat and smoke the same thing?
No. there are smoky whiskeys and there are peaty whiskeys. Peat is more an element of flavor as a result of the marshy quality, whether that be a Highland peat, which is more pine marsh, versus Isla peat, which is more bog cotton, bog myrtle. It's more, I would say it's more herbal versus the pine notes that you're going to get with the Highland. You compare that with, say, Highland Park, which uses more, their peat beds are more heather. It's influenced, so that's more kind of shrubbery. It's almost a combination between the marsh-like quality that you get with Isla peats combined with the woodland style, the little bit woodier, but it's young wood versus old logs. It's young shrubbery.
It's interesting the smelling the differences between these two, and the quarter cask is so intensely sweet and creamy, but it is intense and a little bit hot, and that spice is really coming through, I find, more so than the 10.
Yeah, it's also higher strength. It's a 48%. It's the highest of the whiskeys that we have tasted tonight.
But still very approachable. I'm so surprised that I'm drinking a Laphroaig and really enjoying it.
I'm not
Welcome
surprised.
to the dark side.
I know, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, guys. But for those of you who think you're scared of Laphroaig or big Peaty whiskeys, don't be. Just dive in because they're delicious. Just saying.
Yeah. I would say, the difference between smoke and peat. Smoke is dry, peat is damp.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
And it's funny you mentioned that peat is damp, because this is one of those types of whiskeys. Any real Isla peated whiskey, I love having these on that like damp, rainy day. I'm not even going to attempt the Doric term that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I was just thinking, what is it? Dreek?
Dreek or something.
Yeah, that's it.
That is this whiskey.
Yep.
It's like the perfect time to drink it.
Yeah.
I do have a question that, given that we are talking about Laphroaig and seeing the reactions of some people as they taste it, it's just so shocking for a lot of people. Is there a brand in your portfolio that you enjoy introducing people to more than any of the others? Or is it just like, oh yeah, it's just so much fun with Laphroaig because it's just hysterical?
I love Laphroaig. I love the reactions, and particularly like Julia's response tonight is, people have been told, people are, don't fear the peat.
Yeah.
It's people come in thinking, oh my God, this is going to blow my head off, and then they taste it and they say, oh, and quite often they connect with it, and sometimes they feel like, oh my goodness, I'm home. And there is something primal about it. It's about sitting around the campfire. Now, some people feel like they're sitting in the campfire when they drink this, but there's something very basic about this, something very ancient and dare I say spiritual about the not just Laphroaig but all of these, but it's more intense with Laphroaig.
Yeah.
I will admit, and this goes back to the first Isla whiskey I had was Laphroaig 10, 15 years ago, maybe, something like that. And I hated it. It was hysterical. I bought it because it was on the shelf and people said, oh yeah, that's a great whiskey. I'm like, okay. And at the time it was, I mean, even now Laphroaig 10 is not that expensive. And the first half of that bottle was a struggle.
Yep.
And somewhere in the middle of that bottle, I was like, wait a minute, this is really good now. And part of it is, I think, the shock of opening a new bottle. The peat has to, that aroma needs to dissipate just a touch to really get comfortable. But after that first half of the bottle, I finally got used to that blast of flavor and smoke and peat and everything. And then it was like, wait, there's a whole lot more going on. Then you get into the barbecued meats and stuff. And ever since then, I always have some peated whiskey in the house. But it was funny that it was just such a terrible experience initially.
Well,
but thankfully, by the end of the bottle, I was good.
One of our campaigns was "You'll get there."
There you go. And
yes.
even just sitting here, because I poured this whiskey, an hour and a half ago. And when I first nosed it a couple minutes ago, it was super seaweed. Bill said something, he would call it dank.
Yeah.
That dank, salty, seaweedy smell. But now that it's opened up a little bit and my nose has gotten accustomed to it, those sweeter, softer notes are coming through now. And man, I remember, again, the first time I was in Scotland, I went somewhere in Edinburgh and did a tasting flight just to try and get accustomed to Scotch. And there were definitely 2 peated whiskeys, and I'm sure at least one of them was Laphroaig. And I remember, okay, oh my God. And it was just so intense to my very new to Scotch palate. But now, because I've introduced myself to various Highland peateds and dipping my toes into Islays, now this is just it's a walk in the park compared to where I was 2 years ago.
It's a walk on the beach.
Yeah, walk on the beach in the drizzling rain, in the dreek.
There you go.
This is I can get used to this. I'm good. It's delightful. So, speaking of cold, damp nights around the fire and the real, I don't know, it just reminds me of the humanity of it all. Just nature. We want to be wrapped up. We want to be warm. We want to be safe. We want to tell stories. What is your go-to dram after a long day's work? This question is coming to you from Sinish. What kind of whiskey do you drink after work?
The bottle that's closest to me.
Good answer. And which bottle do you typically place closest to you? What does that say? That looks like a fun
10 cash strength. Very nice.
Ooh, very nice.
I like that bottle.
Yeah, 10-year cask strength. I just it's so dynamic. There's such great flavor. There's so many layers to it. I'm always surprised when people will order a 10-year cask strength whiskey, and then they automatically add water to it. Like, what's the point?
Sorry, there's a great comment there.
Yeah, what was that?
Not laughing at you. Sorry, we haven't caught up on comments. Ken Rivet.
Ted Cruz.
The top right corner didn't he liked whiskey.
I like to think I do not look like Ted Cruz.
But now that he said it, I can see it. That I wasn't thinking that you were the ABC color this whole time.
I guess I'm shaving the beard tomorrow. Okay.
Wayne Whitmer was a little late to the party, but he says hi to all of us. So hi, Wayne. Thanks for tuning in. We are recording this, so it will be available on the WBSE Whiskey Network YouTube page. And I will be writing an article all about Simon and these fantastic distilleries and scotches for the November issue of the single malt section. So be sure to check that out. Just a little disclaimer. Sir, any other questions before wow, we've tasted through the whole lineup. How did the time go by so fast? I guess time flies when you're with friends and drinking a good dram, sharing stories.
Well, and that's so much about, it's that time spent together. You're making new friends. You're reacquainting with old. It's about the spirit within the spirit, and that's the privilege that I've had representing these brands through the years. Is I've been able to make great new friends. I think I have a couple of new ones tonight.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Really enjoyed the evening, and really look forward to being able to do this live in person as well.
Yes. Yes, please.
Because that's a huge part of it. As my job, I am a wandering minstrel across the earth, sharing the stories of these amazing distilleries, and I've been missing the road until just recently. So it was great for me to get back to Scotland. Actually, it was. I'm looking here. It wants to know about the heat consistency with fire versus steam. Yeah, steam is much more consistent than the fire, but the fire creates more layers of flavor. So we like the variability of fire versus steam.
You always got to have the pros and cons.
Yep.
So when you went back to Scotland, what do you do when you're there?
Well, catch up with all my relatives that I haven't seen in a couple of years. So that was great to be able to do that. But also I went to Glengiri, but I spent most of my time on the island of Islay, visiting Bowmore and David Turner, who's our distillery manager there, and spending some time with my good friend John Campbell at Laphroaig, who you may have heard recently that he is actually passing on the torch. He is leaving Laphroaig.
Yeah.
So that I've been working with him for 14 years now. So was able to spend some time with him before he moves on to greener pastures.
There we go. Well, that sounds absolutely lovely. Rob, do you have any other questions before we wrap things up and hopefully have a final toast?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Yes, the final toast will be good.
All right. So here's the toast. Here's to fighting, cheating, stealing, and drinking. If you fight, may you fight alongside my brother. If you cheat, may you cheat death. If you steal, may you steal another's heart. And if you drink, may you drink with me. Cheers. Slán Java.
Slán Java.
Cheers.